back in the show here. Yeah, it was like I was just sleeping away. No, actually, I've been working on this for a few days now, and there's so much information, but trying to distill just a few truths, a few realities of this broadcast pilgrimage to Israel 4. But again, we did sometimes we did 4 sites a day. We visited 4 biblical sites a day. And this would be one of the sites. Tel Hazor is about 10 miles north of the Lake of Galilee, Sea of Galilee, right? So while we were in the Galilee area staying the 2 days, this is one of the sites that we visited. Tel Hazor. That's why I hear people say it. They don't say Hazor, they say Hatzor. So I don't know. I wasn't born back then, and I don't know how to speak Hebrew. And I've said I'm not a biblical archaeologist or a biblical historian. So these are things that I cannot tell you. But anyways, Tel Hazor was Solomon's northern palace. Now, I want to remind you of a couple things. If you remember, we looked at Megiddo a few days ago. Do you remember we looked at Tel Megiddo? Megiddo is one of the places that Solomon, took charge of for a number of years. And we'll find if you catch it somewhere in the broadcast, you'll catch at least one of the similarities between the two cities. But one of them is, well, here's one anyway, is remember the Via Maris, Maris, Via Maris. No, I don't remember that. The Via Maris was the ancient trade route from Egypt to the northern empires of Syria, Anatolia, and Mesopotamia along the Mediterranean coast of the modern day Egypt, Israel, Turkey, Syria. Okay, in Latin, it means way of the sea. Via Maris means way of the sea. So, like Megiddo was on this trade route, and now there's a highway that runs along here where this trade route was, where you know we read in yeah, right, that's just terrible filler word, isn't it? Where the that one too, Solomon, if I remember right, he had like peacocks and apes and all kinds of animals. I know there's at least 3 scriptures in the Word talking about these being in certain areas. Well, how did that animals get transported? They didn't have the local circus to transport these animals. Well, they were transported along with ivory and precious things from Egypt and places along this Via Maris, way of the sea trade route. So this trade route goes north, goes by Megiddo, which, remember, Mount Tabor is there. And that is, you find that written in scripture, and that would have been in the Megiddo broadcast. But this way of the sea, this route via Maris, also goes by Tel Hazor. Remember, Tel is a mound or hill. Now, that mound or hill can be man-made or because civilizations have been built upon it, torn down and built upon it. Just like, areas of cities, they tear buildings down, they build new stuff up. Now, one thing we do is we usually, when we build big buildings, tall buildings, we go deep, right? They go however, if the building's 100 stories tall, they go 20 stories deep or something into the ground. They didn't necessarily do that in Bible times. But they did do some foundation that was deeper, which we'll see today. So Tel Hazor, Hatzor, either way I'm going to say it, is uh, King Solomon's, at least for a period of time, a northern palace, or some say temple. Some say temple, some say palace. But let's get into some of these pictures, I think. See what else I have here. If there's something else I want to mention, which I'm sure there is. So, yeah. All right, let me just give you a little of this. No, the largest Tel. This was the largest city in an area. It was covered like 200 acres. And there's a lower tell, a lower hill that's just pretty much grassy land now. But the Canaanites inhabited that mostly before it was taken over. Then the upper tell where Solomon built his palace, this northern palace. Now, distance, let's talk distance. Uh, to Sea of Galilee is only about 10 miles. And you went, well, how far is Megiddo from there? Well, Megiddo is actually about 24, 25 miles south of the Sea of Galilee. So it's okay, it's hundreds of miles, no, or kilometers, or no, it's actually so between the two, these two cities that Solomon had, there's only about 35 miles. But think about walking. How long will it take you to walk 20 miles? I don't know. It depends how old you are and how fast you walk. You know, that's almost a marathon, 20 miles, right? And can't people do a marathon like 2 hours or something like that? Anyway, I haven't kept up on it. But someone who could walk very fast, like maybe 6 mile an hour, or was walking, could cover 20 miles in 3.5 hours. But you think about the average person walking 3 mile an hour, whatever it'd be. Uh, it's going to take like 6, 7 hours to walk 20 miles. When people traveled back then, they had their gear, they had equipment, plus the terrain they had to go through. So you might do 10 miles a day traveling. So it was probably more like 3 days of travel, 3.5 days of travel between like Megiddo and Hatzor. All right, let me just pull up pictures. I said I would. So here we go. So this is looking kind of in the out in the fields as we're coming up to Hatzor. And this would be looking down to what would be the lower tell, which where the Canaanites lived. But remember, it's all been buried and it's all under soil, and it's fertile farmland and such now. And it isn't such a big deal to archaeologists to dig up this area because it's not really what interests them. Usually it's the things that are more to do with the Bible and all. So here we come. We're coming up to see a couple people that was with the trip on. We're coming up the hill here, and now we're going to start going into the area of this tell or this mound or hill where Solomon's palace and all would be. And they've built this canopy. You can see in the background a canopy there. They built this canopy. Let me darken that so you don't have that background. Just a minute here. Okay. Let's see if we can do this and make it a little better so it's a little darker there. Okay, let's do this one. That helps a little, and it's probably not going to get much better than that. But anyways, so they had this covering over this area where the Solomon's palace was because they want to preserve it and all. I think there might have been one or two other places where they have this kind of thing, but being stone, they tend to last a long time. So yeah, so it's a his or Hatzor National Heritage Park World Heritage Site. Yeah, biblical tells mentioning Hatzor, Megiddo, and Beersheba. That would be later in our broadcast, not today. So as you're coming up to the city, you can still see that covering there. There would be the walls and the gates. Now, not much of the walls is left, right? Over thousands of years, things cave in. They haven't been maintained. People haven't lived there. So yeah, there's not as much to see there. And this tells about, yeah, even I can't see that. All right, let's pull it up. Okay, let's see. Can I? I'm not sure how to do this. That's not going to work. All right. Anyway, maybe you can enlarge that and see that and read it later. Okay. How's that sound? We actually have a couple things like this. I know. So you're coming into the gates of the city, and Solomon used a 6-gate format. Am I using the right term? Anyways, uh, when you came into the gates, now some cities, like if we look at the city of Dan, when that one comes up, you'll see they have a 2-walled gate. If an enemy got past the first gate, the you still had another gate they had to break through, so they hadn't actually broke in. It would be like the shows with all these not forts, because forts, well, like a fort has a gate, or the castles, they'll have like a gate, right? Well, back then they would often have two gates, because if the enemy got past the first gate, they were not into the second gate, where you were. So we're looking from this first gate to the second gate. Now, of course, there would have been like doors or things here to block access, but Solomon had built these like six. They call them like six gates, were areas where there could be towers and things. So it was even harder because Solomon fortified these. It'd be even harder for an enemy to get into the main part of the city. And would be looking into, if I remember right, one of the areas where I'm looking down, where one of these towers have been built, and one of the protections for the city. Now, this is just showing uh, a sign for some pottery. So the types of pottery that they would find, dating its different ages, and if it's Canaanites, whatever. Canaanites, because we say Canaan, right? What type of pottery, how it's aged. Same thing. I just back off. So now you see an area. So you would have uh, areas where, soldiers would be. You'd have places where meetings would be, all these different things that would happen. Uh, in these different places. And it's not to say, because we didn't live back then, it's hard to say, oh, we have all the insights to what's going on. Well, we actually don't. So here we're coming up to the palace area again that they've protected, because they want to preserve it. Now, I've got some stuff to read here about this place. It's known in Joshua's day as the largest tell. Well, actually, it was known as the head of all those kingdoms. It was considered the head of all the kingdoms because it was about 200 acres, and it was, I believe, it's three times the size of Jerusalem, but it was one of the largest uh, encampments. And we'll find out that when Joshua attacked it and all, it was like God says in the scriptures, the enemy was as numerous as the sand of the sea. So it was actually a mighty miracle that it was delivered to them. But the Tel of Hazor is today is the largest in Israel, 200 acres. They use the term, they use another term, hectares or something. I can't remember. I got to do better, right? Get all these notes down. And at its height of the Canaanite period, the city encompassed this entire area. Later, it was inhabited by the Israelites, the fortified city. Joshua takes over. Solomon is later there, and it's inhabited by the Israelites. It included only in the upper city. Remember, I've said it's buried down below. So I've got a number of different views here looking around the area of this Hatzor. There was a well here that, you remember in Megiddo, that well, and it went down and showed you the tunnel and all. Well, they also had one that was like 150 feet deep here that went down to get the water for them, and that was quite the deal. Now, let me read about this gate. I was telling you about the gate, so I'll read it to you and you get it more accurately. Archaeologists have uncovered a six-chambered gate in Hazor. It is nearly identical in size and design to the gates at Megiddo and also Gezer. Is that how you say it? Oh, man. The best explanation for this is these gates were all built by the same government. These gates are a remarkable testimony to Solomon's building activity as described in 1 Kings 9, verse 15. You may want to go and read some of these accounts. So 1 Kings 9:15, I probably will read some to you. So again, we're looking at remains. Now in the background there, I got to enlarge this so I can see it better. Yeah, so there's some vertical stones back in this background there. You see those vertical stones? Oh, how did I do that? I don't know what I'm doing with this, all these features I have. Anyways, this area would be like where the horse stables were. That would be like one of the things that would be there. The horses were kept, maybe chariots somewhere in this area. Yeah, and this is the palace of the king of Hazor. Jabin was one of the kings that's in the Bible that is mentioned, which we'll read. Now, they used like they must have brought in or something this granite that they would use, and they would put these pillars. Now this pillar here, a wood pillar or whatever they've put here, is just what men have put there. But these pillars going into this palace, just a moment, were of like granite, very strong, very tough, very impressive for their day. And then, if you'll notice, as we're coming into the palace, you look into the ground, and I wish I could remember this exactly, but you see that little groove there in the ground there, not groove, what would we call that? It's dug out like no, you come here and look at it and tell me what it is. So this little dig out right there is where the inner like gates or doors would swing, pivot on these pivot points right there. It's like a little circumference. So a pivot point. Anyways, I think I have another one here on the other side. And you can see this is the other side. So this is where, they didn't have modern hinges like we've got hinges, we hang doors. Well, they didn't have hinges. So this is their hinges. This is where they would pivot their gates and all. So this is inside. This is as John Shane Height was teaching us the history of, remember, Jael, Jael, and Sisera. Sisera, let me pull up these records because now that we're getting there, yeah, give me a moment. Here we go. So let me build into this a minute. Here I will do that, and that's my next picture. This is from Joshua 11:10 and 11. And Joshua turned back at that time and captured Hazor and struck its king with a sword, for Hazor was formerly the head of all those kingdoms. Of all the kingdoms, the Canaanite kingdoms, it was concerned like the most major, the biggest, the largest. If you want to conquer them, you better conquer this one. So it was the head of all those kingdoms, and they struck it with a sword of all were in it, devoting them to destruction. There was none left that breathed, and he burned Hazor with fire. Why burn with fire? Well, if you get enough wood and you get a hot fire over the rock, the heat will crack the rocks and they can break down the old structure. So there were some areas we couldn't go in because there's some archaeological diggings going on in some of the area. I think I've got one more here. And they're figuring out, okay, what was this as far as the palace? What was this area? What was going on? Let's see. Okay, this was actually an earlier picture, but you couldn't really see it well. So look at and in my, I think I may have another picture of this coming up. But when you're going to support a building, what do we do to support a building? Well, to support a building, we put a foundation, but you have like cornerstones. Well, back then they didn't do things like we do it, but this would be like where their cornerstone or a corner foundation. Now there's like some kind of plastic or protection over this, but basically there's rock here, and this was where they would have put like their foundation for like the palace, things like this, that they wanted something that was going to be, permanent. Because in Bible lands they have earthquakes and different things, and yeah, cities were destroyed sometimes by earthquakes, or parts of the cities were destroyed by earthquakes. Now there's a little like canopy type thing up north there. I don't know if it's actually north of our direction. I didn't go up there. Only one person I know of in our group went up there. I should have asked her if she had any pictures and tell me maybe this is where the well was. But again, we'd be looking at meeting quarters, where equipment might have been kept. Let's see, which picture am I actually on? Okay, good. So this is as we were leaving the property, Hatzor, the gates there and all. Let's see, what else do I have? Um, and this was an olive tree, and there was olives on this tree. I'm going to go back to the gates, and I want to read some of this to you, some of these things. So we've just read in Joshua 11:10 and 11, and this is really a miraculous thing, because the Bible tells us there was numerous, these Canaanites, and they're geared up, were as numerous as the sand of the sea. And the Israelites were pretty numerous, but they did not go in with that number. In Joshua 19:35, it mentions that uh, they fortified the city of Hazor. They made it more resistant to attack and so forth. And it was an inheritance for the tribe of the people of Naphtali. Naphtali, I believe that's how you say it. So the fortified cities are Ziddim, Zur, Hamath, Raid, Raketh. Excuse me. I'm in Joshua 19:35 and reading on. I want to get cool. Hatzor is mentioned here, and is Megiddo mentioned here? Because in some of these, Megiddo is also mentioned. Anyways, this is the inheritance of the tribe of the people of Naphtali according to their clans, cities, or their villages. So this area would have been given to them. And we read in Judges 4:5 through 24. I'm not going to read that, but you can go there. And in 4:17 and 18. But in this record, so Sisera, I mentioned this a couple minutes ago, Sisera fled, Sisera, fled on foot from the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was peace among them. And Jabin, Jabin is the king of Hatzor, and the house of Heber the Kenite. And Jael comes to him to meet Sisera and said to him, "Turn aside, my lord," and so forth. So this woman, remember, some of you remember this record, took care. Sisera is escaping. All his people are pretty much killed by the Israelites and all, and he's escaping. So Jael lets him in the tent, and protects him. And she has him hiding, so when the Israelites come looking, they won't find him. So what happens is they make a covenant. She does this thing with like some goat's milk and gives it to him that would have been salted, making a covenant, an agreement with him that she would protect him, watch over him. But what happened is he went into her side of the tent. No man, that was the husband or maybe the little children, were allowed in the woman's side of the tent. But he didn't trust her. He was still fearful. He went into her side of the tent. And remember, she took a tent peg, like a stake, put it in his head and jammed it, jammed it through his head. Yeah, so you find that there. This is another record, 2 Kings 15:29. In the days of Pekah, Pekh, king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came and captured, Lijon, Abel Beth Makkah, Janah. Oh my gosh. Oh, Hazor is in here. And Gilead and Galilee and all the land of Naphtali, he carried all the people captive to Syria. All these people that were now inhabitants there of the Israelites and all, and it was given to, they were taken captive. Why were they taken captive? Because when people disobeyed God, he let them, have at it. And then so when the enemy attacked, they were taken captive. So I've mentioned Megiddo is about 26 miles south of the Lake of Galilee, and Hatzor is 10 miles north, so about 35, 36 miles between them. I want to read some notes from my Bible Hands commentary. Thank you, Cindy. I bet Gail would help too, and any of the team would help. What a great family of God to be with on this. But Cindy helped me with this since I still don't have a replacement Bible companions. Hatzor, meaning enclosed settlement, is mentioned several times in the Old Testament. It's the name of 3 different cities in Israel and also a city or confederacy in Arabia. In Israel, Hazor is in Judah, Joshua 15:23. This is the Tel Hazor, the one we're talking about, the mound or the hill where this city is. Hatzor in Naphtali is well known both because Joshua and Judges have vivid accounts of the city. The site of Hatzor is approximately 10 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, right? We said that, and 7 miles south of the city of Kadesh. It had about a 275-acre lower city that was Canaan. The Canaanites lived there. And it's the largest tell in Israel. Remember, a tell is, now he says here, an abandoned city or mound. Remember, built on a mound, built on a hill, so on and so forth. During the Israelite conquest of Canaan, Jabin, the king of Hatzor, amassed an army consisting of troops from at least 13 different cities, or perhaps more accurately, city-states, southeast from the city of Meron, the Sea of Galilee. Due to the size of the enemy army, Joshua's defeat of this army was one of the greatest military victories in entire Israel campaign history in the conquest of Canaan. The Bible says of the enemy, they came out with all their troops and a large number of horses and chariots, a huge army of numerous as the sand on the seashore. Joshua 11:4. So this is quite a defeat that they won this largest of all tells, places with this city fortified and so forth. Nevertheless, Yahweh, God was with Joshua and the Canaanites. God was with Joshua, and the Canaanites were defeated. After the battle, Joshua put the king of Hazor to the sword and burned the city. Mentioned that earlier, how they would burn it and do that. We read that scriptures. In spite of being destroyed by Joshua, Hazor was rebuilt by the Canaanites and once again became a powerful city. Why? Because of the disobedience of the people there to God. He let them have it. Yeah, not so good. Joshua records it after Ehud died. Remember, Ehud was the king that prophet comes and says, "I got a private meeting with you," and he takes a knife or something and stabs the king, and it says he was so fat that the knife was swallowed up in the fat. So after Ehud died, Jabin of Hatzor oppressed Israel. Now, not the same monarch as the time of Joshua. Remember, they use same terms like Herod. In the time of Christ, through those years, we got Herods, but we have different Herods, Herod the Great and so forth. Jabin is apparently a title like Pharaoh. Okay, that's kind of what we're saying. Mhm. Jabin's army was commanded by Sisera, who lived in, oh my gosh, can't even say it, Harosheth of the nations, Harosheth Hagomen. Sisera had 900 armed chariots that controlled the valley of Jezreel in the Jordan Valley, and he oppressed Israel for 20 years. Judges records the battle between Israelites Deborah. Remember, Deborah was one of the judges. Deborah and Barak, and the Canaanites, Sisera and Jabin. Sisera and Jabin lost the conflict. The Bible does not speak of what happened to Hazor at that time. This different, at a different time. Solomon, 979 to 939 BC, strengthened Hazor and used it as a chariot city and a fortress. Evidently, this was done to protect the northern entrance to Palestine. Solomon utilized forced labor to carry out the project of Hazor, as well as in Megiddo and Gezer. Forced labor, I don't know, hired slaves that they took and just made them work, fed them, and get to work. I don't remember. That was explained, but I don't remember it. Okay. So Solomon's Hatzor was apparently later destroyed by fire, but the city was in such a strategic location that it continued to be rebuilt and reconquered into the Hellenistic period. There's at least, remember when we talked about Megiddo, there was like at least 23 civilization layers, people that conquered and took it over. Well, there's more like 30 here at Tel Hazor, And remember, these are on the Via Maris. We've talked about this major trade route. You control Megiddo, you control Hatzor, you control the taxes, you control what's flowing through. You're the big show. It'd be like when you go to California, usually they check to see if you have any fruit or anything. You bring it in. There's border control, but it's more like, yeah, it's more like when we've done our missions and we go like, let's say Kenya to Uganda. No, you got to make sure you got your yellow fever shot. You've got, they check you out a lot more closely. The border's a lot more closely controlled. Well, they could do that at these places. All right, let me get back to. We're almost done here, and I'll give you these records to read later because I'm not going to read them because we're just flying along here, aren't we? All right. Uh, okay, Solomon used forced labor here as well as Megiddo and Gezer. How do you say it? Someone's going to tell me how to say it. Which were other cities that Solomon turned to fortresses. Solomon's Hatzor was apparently destroyed in fire, but the city was in strategic location, so it was rebuilt through the Hellenistic period. When Jeremiah prophesied against Hatzor, it was the same one in Arabia that he said would become a haunt of jackals and a desolate place forever. And it is a place that is desolate. I lost my picture. Come back. All right. So I'm going to give you these records. Some I read a little bit of. Joshua 11:10 and 11. Joshua fortified the northern kings. Joshua battled the northern kings, and destroyed Hazor and killed Jabin. Nice if I had an iPad. On a phone, this is really stretching it. Okay. Yeah, well, I know that's going to come to pass, so no sweat there. Come on. All right, so the other records you might want to consider are Joshua 19:36. Joshua allotted Hatzor to the tribe of Naphtali, which we mentioned. Judges 4:5. Deborah and Barak delivered Israel from the Jabin, the king of Hatzor. And if you'll read that record in Judges 4, chapter 4, verse 5, you'll read about that deliverance and all, and about Jael putting that spike through what's his name, Barak's head, and killing him because of his lack of trust, and he broke a salt covenant. And if you broke a salt covenant in a time of Bibles, you're worthy of death. 1 Kings 9:15 and following. So 1 Kings 9:15 and read on through the chapter. Solomon used the forced labor to fortify Hatzor. And then 2 Kings 15:29. You want to read that. Let's see, king of Syria, which also mentions this area in 2 Kings 15:29. So anyways, you've got Megiddo to the south, along this Via Maris, along the way of the sea, along the way of these trade routes, and it was a vital, crucial city to the control of who gets in and out and what's going on. So if you controlled that city, you controlled the land. Again, you determined taxes, you ran the show. And again, now to the north, about 35, 36 miles of that, past north of the Sea of Galilee now, or Megiddo south of it, Tel Hazor is where Solomon built a palace. And this is one of the points that was pointed out. So maybe in Jerusalem, Solomon had all these wives, so he'd have like the best of his wives and all, but he'd always keep some of his women up here. So if he got bored up there, he always had some action or something. I don't know. But anyways, it is very interesting to realize how that Solomon built these 6 gate cities. He had really thought it through how to protect them. As long as the people stood for God, they were well protected, well barricaded. They had the equipment. They didn't need the number as the multitude of the sand of the sea because they were on God's team, right? But when God's people disobeyed, things did not go so well. And Naphtali, this area, Hatzor, was captured by the Canaanites. And again, the Canaanites ruled this area. So there's so much more here. Oh, good. I thought of this. If you go to my Firecatcher Ministry page, and I'll link it up here after this few 10 minutes or so. If you go to my Firecatcher Ministry page on Monday, when I wanted to do this broadcast, I have a link, and it's not a short one. I'm going to say it's 45 minutes, but it gives even a better overview than I have of this site, which meant and more pictures and shots. They did a really good job. So if you go to Firecatcher Ministry page, find my post from Monday on Tel Hazor, you'll find a great video that will fill in so many things and explain them better than I am doing. All right. Well, we'll just have to see if the Lord tarries what happens Friday. But I can tell you this, if you trust in the Lord with all your heart, He's going to make your way good and He will take care of you. So why not trust Him with all your heart? And let's not be like the Israelites, wishy washy. On one day, off another day. Let's just stay on and stay in God's great care.